The Wampanoag tribe, people of the first light. Long before the Pilgrims arrived, the Wampanoag Native Americans lived in the United States. They are a nation of people that have been here for thousands of years. In the 1600s, there were 67 villages that made up the Wampanoag Nation. They lived in the states that are now known as Massachusetts and Rhode Island. The Wampanoag had a special way of growing corn, squash, and beans. First, they buried fish in the ground to give it special nutrients. Then they planted the corn on top of the fish. When the corn grew, the beans and squash were planted on top of it. These three foods were called the Three Sisters. The Wampanoag women were in charge of growing the food. The Wampanoag had a lot of respect for animals. They never kept them as pets. Many times they fed animals and took care of the sick ones. Every time they took an animal's life, they said a prayer for it and had a celebration of thanks. The Wampanoag also used all parts of the animals they killed. They used the skin, fur, and meat to make tools, clothes, musical instruments, and more. These items are made from an animal: a cradleboard, drum, spear, and bow. We also have examples of a deer toe leg rattle, and then there's another picture of the Wampanoag water drum. During the growing season, a Wampanoag family lived in a wigwam called a wetu. It was made of saplings or young trees for the frame. Then wide sheets of bark were put on top. In the winter, families moved to the village and lived in long houses. These homes could house 40 to 50 people or 4 families. There was a fire inside for each family with holes in the top for the smoke to escape. The Wampanoag children learned and played from watching the adults. Boys and girls were taught to swim in the ponds and oceans. Young girls were taught to make pots from clay. They also made corn husk dolls like the one shown below. Boys were given a small bow and taught to hunt for small deer and pigeons. Kids played many games. They would play many toss and catch games, which helped them learn skills used for hunting and sewing. The Wampanoag clothing was made from deer skin. The breechcloth was worn by both men and women and hung down from the waist. In colder weather, mantles were worn. These were wrapped around the body and used to keep warm. Leggings were worn to keep their legs from getting scratched and bitten. Women wore skirts held by a belt. They also wore beaded jewelry and had tattoos. There were 4 ways the Wampanoag gathered food. These were hunting, fishing, harvesting wild plants, and the planting of crops. They ate the animals they hunted, such as deer, moose, and beaver. Many berries, green, and mushrooms were found and eaten. The Wampanoag fished for trout, herring, and tuna. The women caught shellfish, such as lobsters, mussels, clams, and crabs. They made soups and a special dish called nassup, which was made from corn. And there's a picture of the soup they were talking about, nassup, that's made from corn, and an example of a lady who's using the traditional clay pot to cook in. Wampanoag children were thought of as sacred gifts. They are the footsteps to the future. When they are born, a ceremony is held. Wampanoag children were taught the principles of their parents, such as working together as a community. They were taught to respect all forms of life, including the sky, rocks, and the water. The kids were taught skills such as fishing, hunting, and sewing. Both the boys and girls made crafts such as pottery and hunting tools like spears.